This is Sara with Posh Pooch Designs, and today's video I'm going to be showing you how to make this little collar for your dog. I call this the Pumpkin Spice Dog Collar. Works great for kitty cats too, and it's totally adjustable for any size dog. And I'll explain to you how to do that when we get a little farther in the video. Now this is a free pattern on my blog, and I'll put that blog link right down there in the notes underneath the video. What you're going to need to make a little collar for your dog or cat, or even for yourself, you could make this for yourself just by adjusting the amount of chains at the beginning. But don't worry, I will explain that later. You're going to need any kind of worsted weight number 4 yarn. Now the original pattern I did, I used Caron's Simply Soft in the gold, which had different variations of oranges and golds, very pretty. This one is also Caron's Simply Soft, just in the pumpkin color. It's kind of a rusty orange, and I really love how that turned out. You're going to need any kind of worsted weight, like I said, number 4. And for today's demonstration, I'm going to use this Vanna's Choice. This color is called Tangerine Mist. And since I don't have any more of that Caron Simply Soft in that variegated, I thought I'd try this one because I really like this yarn and see how it turns out. You're going to need about an ounce or more, depending on what size collar that you make. You're also going to need a button. Now this button is a polymer clay button that I made. It's got purples and oranges and white in it. And you can use any button from about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. Here's a orange one, a wooden one, a lighter orange one. You can use any button that you want to hold it together at the top. These are all 3/4 inch buttons, and this one's almost an inch. So any of them will work. We're going to be stitching today with our H hook, which is a 5mm. You're going to need a needle for weaving in those ends and sewing on that button. And you're also going to need a pair of scissors for clipping those strings. Now another thing that you're going to need is a measuring tape. And it's a good idea to measure your dog or cat or your neck, whoever you're making this for, so that you know how to adjust the pattern. So the way the pattern works is it's stitched flat out. Then there's some increased stitches with some shell stitches to give it the collar shape. But when we begin, you're going to need to take that measurement that you got from your dog or your cat. If your dog or cat's neck measures 10 inches, you're going to need 3 chains per inch, or 30 chains. 3 chains make 1 inch. So you'll need to multiply 10 times 3, which would be 30 chains. And then you need to add 1 for your turning chain at the beginning. So I'm going to chain 31 chains. I'm going to start with my slip knot. And like I said, I'm going to chain 31 chains. 10 times 3 is 30. Plus the extra chain as our turning chain, and so I'm going to need 31 chains. I chained my 31 chains. I'm going to turn, and I'm going to begin stitching single crochets in the second chain from the hook. Here's our first chain. Here's our second. So I put my hook in. I'm going to pull up a loop, yarn over, and go through both of those loops on my hook. And I'll put 1 single crochet in each chain across. And this is going to give me 30 single crochets because we didn't stitch a single crochet in the first chain. we began stitching in the second chain from the hook. So I'm placing 1 single crochet in each chain across. So we have stitched our first row of single crochets. Now, whether you added chains to make it wider or smaller, this row is exactly the same. 1 row of single crochets in those chains. So now we're going to chain 1 and we're going to turn. And this is where it will be a little bit different. But once we establish the second row, you'll understand what I'm talking about, okay? Now, for all the sizes, the first 6 stitches are exactly the same. You'll stitch 2 double crochets in the first stitch, and then you'll stitch 1 double crochet in the next 2, and then we're going to stitch 1 half double crochet in the next 3. And then we'll stitch all the way across. It doesn't matter what size you made, you're going to stitch single crochets all the way across until you reach the last 6 stitches. And then we'll repeat what we did at the beginning. 1 half double crochet in the next 3, 1 double crochet in the next 2, and then 2 double crochets in the last stitch. All right, so let's do that together. We're going to place 2 half double crochets in the first single crochet. So we're going to yarn over. We're going to go in that stitch and pull up a loop. We'll have 3 loops on our hook, yarn over and go through the first 2, yarn over and go through the last 2. And we'll repeat that, placing another double crochet in that same single crochet. So there's our 2 double crochets in our first single crochet. Now we're going to place 1 double crochet in the next 2 single crochets. So I've already yarned over. There's 1 double crochet. Now we go to the next stitch and stitch another double crochet. So now we have the 2 double crochets in the first stitch and 1 double crochet in each of the next 2. So the next 3 stitches we're going to stitch a half double crochet. So we're going to yarn over, we're going to go in that stitch and pull up a loop, yarn over and go through all 3 of those stitches, and we'll do that 2 more times. And you'll begin to see that it's taller on the end and has gradual going down. So now we're going to place 1 single crochet in each stitch across, no matter what size you're making, until we reach the last 6 single crochets. So if you added chains to your collar, you're going to have more single crochets in this section. If you added less, because your dog or cat has a tinier neck, you're going to have less single crochets in this section. The main thing is that we stitched in those first 6, then we have single crochets, and we're going to stitch single crochets till we get to the last 6 single crochets, and then we'll repeat what we did on the last end on the next end, only in reverse. All right, let me count and see how many I have left. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like I need to make 1 more single crochet. All right, so there's how it looks so far. And now we have those last 6 single crochets, so we're going to put 1 half double in the first 3. Then we'll place a double crochet in the next 2. And lastly, in this last stitch, we're going to place 2 double crochets like we did at the beginning of this row. So this is how it should look. We've got the 4 double crochets, 3 half double crochets, single crochets all the way across, 3 half double crochets, and the 4 double crochets. All right, let's chain 1 and turn. All right, so for this next row, we're going to begin like we did the last row, only we're going to have an extra double crochet in here. So we're going to place 2 double crochets in the first stitch, like we did on the previous row. 1 and 2. And then we're going to place 1 double crochet in the next 3 stitches. The first or the second row we did 2, but now we're doing 3. So we began with 2 double crochets in that first stitch. Then we did 1 double crochet in the next 3 stitches. And now we're going to do 1 half double crochet in the next 3 stitches. 1, 2, and 3. And you can see the shape of the collar where it's longer starting to form. All right, so now we're going to do a bunch of those single crochets across, and instead of not stitching in the last 6, we're not going to stitch in the last 7. So let's place our single crochets across. I stitched my single crochets across the center portion, and I've left my last 7 stitches unworked. And so now we're going to place a half double crochet in the next 3. 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to place a double crochet in the next 3. Whoops, there we go. Didn't want to get on my finger. 2 and 3. And then in this last stitch, we're going to place 2 double crochets. 1 and 2. We'll go ahead and chain 1. And you can see already that it's starting to form a nice collar. Now we're ready to start the shell stitch rows. So we're going to begin with chaining 3. I already chained 1, so we're going to chain 2 more. We're going to skip the next stitch, and we're going to place a shell stitch in the next stitch. And the shell stitch is 3 double crochets in the same stitch. 1, 2, 3. So when I say a shell stitch across this row, it means 3 double crochets in the same stitch. Now we're going to skip the next stitch, and we're going to place a slip stitch in the next stitch. And if you're not sure what a slip stitch is, you put your hook through, pull up a loop, and that loop that you just pulled up, you pull it right through the loop that's on your hook. We're going to skip the next stitch, and we're going to stitch a shell stitch in the next stitch. And we're going to repeat this all the way across this row. A shell stitch, skip the next stitch, a slip stitch, skip the next stitch, a shell stitch. All right, so let's skip the next stitch and stitch a slip stitch. Then we'll skip that next stitch and stitch a shell stitch. And this is how this row is done all the way across. So you can see I've completed the shell stitch row. I love how that looks, very pretty. And when we get to the end, we're going to skip that second to the last stitch and put a double crochet in that last stitch. We'll chain one and turn. All right, so for the next row, we're going to be stitching shell stitches in the tops of our shell stitches. And so the way we'll work that is we'll place 3 double crochets, a shell stitch, in the center double crochet of each of the shell stitches. So there's 1, 2, 3 double crochets, and we're going to go right in that center double crochet. It's the second double crochet, and we're going to stitch 3 double crochets to make a shell stitch in the top of the shell stitch. After we make the shell stitch in the top of the shell stitch, we're going to chain one and then repeat that on each shell stitch across. So we're going to place 3 double crochets in the top of the shell stitch, working in that second double crochet, and chain one, and repeat this all the way across. So basically we're stitching shell stitches in our shell stitches, chain one, and repeat. And this is going to give us a nice open, lacy looking collar. So we'll repeat this across, shell stitch, chain one, shell stitch, chain one, all the way across. So once we've stitched our shell stitch in our shell stitch with the chain one in between all the way across, we're just going to stitch a slip stitch right in the top of that chain 3, just like that. So the collar portion is done. What we're going to do next is we're going to single crochet up the side of the collar. Then we're going to single crochet across the top. We'll make our little button loop, and then we'll single crochet down the side. Sometimes single crocheting on the edges of stitches can be a little bit confusing. So what I'm going to do is show you how to do that, and we're just going to put our hook through some of the stitches. When you can, stitch in a stitch, but like here there's a hole, so we're going to have to go in that hole and stitch a single crochet. But it's always good to try, if you can, to stitch in the side of a stitch instead of a hole if you want a nice even looking edge. Alright, let's leave that tail out of the way. So I single crocheted up the edge, and now I'm going to single crochet across the top of our collar. And this is relatively easy. You can just stitch right in each one of those chains working across the top. And this is just going to give us a nice edge. So we single crocheted up the side, and now we're single crocheting across the top. I single crocheted up the edge of my collar. I ended up putting 3 single crochets in this corner because I thought it turned better, and that's a good idea to do. I took it out, put 3 single crochets in the corner so that we have a nice corner edge, and then I single crocheted across the top of my collar until I reach the next corner. I'm going to chain 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now this is if you've got from a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch to 1 inch button. If you're using a much bigger button, you may want to make your button loop bigger. Just keep in mind that yarn can be very stretchy. We're going to go right back in that same place and we're going to stitch another single crochet, and that gives us a nice button loop. Alright, so now we're going to single crochet down the edge so we have a nice even edge on our collar. And again, trying to stitch in the sides of the stitches opposed to the holes. And sometimes you'll have to stitch in a hole. That's totally normal. All right. Now I've stitched down the edge. I'm going to cut my yarn. And I'm going to tie that off. So this is how it should look at this point. We single crocheted up the edge. We put 3 single crochets in that corner. Then we single crocheted across this edge. I put 1 single crochet in this corner. Then I chained 6 and put a single crochet in that same spot where I did that first single crochet there. And then I single crocheted down the side. So now we need a little bit of tidying up, and we need to add our button. So the first thing I'm going to do is tidy up this edge and weave in this piece of yarn. Go this way, and then I'm going to go this way because this is the front. Go ahead and decide which side is your front, and this is my front. So I'm going to turn this over, pull this out a little bit. And I'm just going to weave up that side. There we go. Didn't want to get in there. And I always like to go one way, then maybe go up a stitch and go back the other way. And I like to try to do that 3 times if possible. Try to leave myself enough yarn where I can do that. There we go. Make sure that's snug down and cut that string. All right, so now I need to choose which button I think is going to look best with this collar. I pulled that a little bit. Let's get that out. There we go. All right, so what I started with was a good sized piece of yarn. And instead of just weaving this in, I'm going to use this to tie on my button. So when you're beginning, remember, you might want to start with a long tail, so you can use that tail to sew on your button. And I'm going to go ahead, that's the back, and I'm going to go ahead and just bring it to the front. And I think I'm going to use this lighter button on this one. Whoa, those are tight buttonholes. There we go. The other one, the orange one, I think is too orange for this. And I think this wooden one just doesn't look right. The shade's off. So I think this color is going to work just fine. And you want to make sure you get that right up in the corner. My buttonholes are going to be a little snug. And when you're stitching your button on, make sure you go through some stitches, not holes, or your buttonhole will probably pull through. There we go. This button's going to stay put because those buttonholes are tight. All right, let's get that through. Now we'll just go on the back side and weave that in, going through some stitches, and make sure that's going to stay put. We don't want that button coming off. Anytime you use a button or a bead or anything little like that that a dog can chew on and choke on, make sure that it's attached very securely and it's up under their neck where they're not going to be biting on it. All right, so here's our collar. We'll put that little button loop over it. And there you go. Now remember, this will work for any size. It's just a matter of adding chains in that center section for as long as you need, and then the collar ends are the same. So this is my pumpkin spice dog collar, but you could make one even for yourself.